The thing's not. You have to do like a baked potato too.
Mm-hmm.
You got to do the steak,
all the
a potato,
sides.
and the side. Like that's probably what would kill me in the end.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Aggie Game Day Extra Podcast. I am Chief Meteorologist Max Crawford, along with Texas A&M Senior Sports Writer Travis L. Brown, and Sports Director Tyler Shaw. Good afternoon, fellas.
Afternoon.
You did well. You did well.
Great
Thank
intro.
you. The AC has not been fixed in this room.
We're
That's part of
working
the
on
reason
it.
why I'm wearing a polo, but it's okay. We're rocking and
I
rolling.
thought you were just trying to be more like me.
What?
You're taking the intro, so I thought you were just trying to.
Yeah, I'm not
Put a
wearing a
polo
tie
on
in this. I'm not wearing a tie in this room unless I have to.
I kind of like being taller than you on camera.
It is nice. It looks good.
It's
Yeah,
different.
should we get a
You-
different
maybe
angle
I-
back here of what it?
Maybe I can get one of.
You'd make a great tall person, Travis.
He's gonna stand on the box now.
Maybe I can make it worse.
You can bring
Oh!
There we go.
Look at you. Okay, but you know what the problem is? There is you're farther away from the microphone.
That's a good
Yeah,
point.
eat the mic.
That's a good
Yeah.
point.
So the reason I brought us in is because Travis is still getting his broadcast chops, and he doesn't like the Colin Cowherd it, where he can just talk hours at end, kind of just by himself, or like Josh Pate.
Well, no one
where
wants
they
to
can
hear
just
me
talk.
talk that long.
Be that as
I've
it may.
been told by various message boards and parts of the internet that my voice is annoying.
Wow.
So maybe people.
Hey, so have I. So have I.
Maybe,
and then I'm always
maybe
wrong.
people just don't want
That's
to
the
hear
internet,
as
man.
much
Yeah. Well-
of me.
Well, so yeah, that's why we kind of flipped it around a little bit, because we're trying to have a conversation here, and you mentioned earlier that you're kind of in the weeds of this whole thing with the house settlement specifically. That's what a lot of this pod is going to be about today, is trying to sort all this out, because this is maybe in the sports world it's not brand new, but this is brand new in that there's a lot, and a lot of people are still coming through it. So we're going to try to make sense of it from a landscape perspective, how that's going to affect A&M, how in some ways A&M has maybe been preparing for this for a while, what the next steps are, and maybe even in a broader way what this means for the future of college athletics, male and female. And so do you want to just dive in? I mean, so
Yeah,
what was the house settlement? What does that mean? I'm not like from a political perspective or whatever, but like what has changed in the past like 3 or 4 days that was not the case last week?
Yeah, the quick synopsis in 2020, a guy named Grant House and Sedona Price were two college athletes who wanted to be able to earn NIL. So they filed this lawsuit, Grant House kind of becoming the name of it. As NIL became legal in 2021, the purpose of it shifted to get back pay for NIL that they weren't able to get, plus kind of reframe the structure, the amateur model of the NCAA to where athletes could make money in the future. And that's kind of where we landed. So here is some of the, if it would have gone to trial, if the NCAA and the House and the plaintiffs would have gone to trial, it would have the potential for, if the plaintiffs won, the damages would be tripled, because that's what happens in antitrust civil cases. So that would have bankrupted the NCAA and all the power conferences. It would have been close to $10 billion if they would have lost that. So in order to be able to have a manageable sum, they approached the plaintiffs and they settled. And this settlement was approved by Judge Claudia Wilkin on last Friday night at like 8 p.m. when I thought all of my work was over. And little did I know, it was just Max over here texting me that I needed to play one of my games in our NCAA Dynasty. I'm like, dude,
Well,
not
you
now.
needed to.
Not now. So, couple of the bullet points. Universities now can share revenue up to $20.5 million in year one. So they're able to directly share broadcast rights and money made off broadcast rights, off ticket sales, off concession sales, things like that with athletes. But there is a cap, and that cap will escalate each year. First season, it's going to be $20.5 million. In the past, each program, each sport had a scholarship limit. Notably, football was 85, baseball was 11.5, and so on and so forth. No more scholarship limits. Every athlete who is on roster now can earn a full or partial scholarship. but it also creates roster limits to mitigate the amount of money that schools have to pay. So, for instance, now football will be 105 athletes. Baseball, I believe, is 35. There's a whole list of those in the settlement. It also creates this third-party enforcement organization that we'll talk about a little bit later, called the College Sports Commission, and that's going to manage and keep an eye on if schools are staying under that revenue sharing cap. It's going to look at every NIL deal above $600 that's done for any athlete and make sure that it is for a valid business purpose and that it falls in line with the market on what those. So you're not getting one kid who's getting paid $50 for an autograph or for an ad, a post on their social media, and another kid who's getting paid $1 million to make one social media post. That the quid pro quo is a value there. And then, as we talked about, it also pays damages to past athletes from 2016 to 2024 for lost NIL that they might have been able to occur, and that'll come in payments. It's going to be up to like $2 billion for all the athletes. So that's where we are with the settlement. There's lots of nuance and lots of little things that we didn't necessarily touch on. There's things like the players who are going to get cut because of the roster limits. Those players are going to be designated athletes, which means they get to stay on roster and they don't until their eligibility expires, which means the roster limits will settle onto those numbers over the next 2 to 4 years as these athletes matriculate out of eligibility, and then the roster limits will come into place. Judge Claudia Wilkin had a point that she didn't want to see athletes basically get cut because of this.
It's kind of this reminds me of what we saw. I mean, really, what we just saw end was with the COVID. When everyone was granted that kind of extra year of eligibility with COVID, rosters were so kind of different and weird because you had so many 5th and 6th year players that still had more eligibility that they wouldn't have had there not been that kind of COVID year. And this is kind of going to do the same thing where it's going to take a few years for things to settle down. So we might see bigger rosters for a little bit. And
so this is kind of what I wanted to do with this. It's a good point. Y'all kind of represent, to varying degrees, average Joe fan. We had another KBTX staffer in here that was like, I'm glad y'all are talking about this because I love sports and I don't understand any of this. So when you look at this, when you see this, when you've read some of these stories and seen some of this reporting, what are some of the questions that pop up in your mind of like, how is this going to work? What does that mean? Can you specify this a little more? Where does this go in the future?
I think for me, I had been following NIL stuff pretty closely, especially when it first started, because I thought that there was a real opportunity for A&M to distance themselves from other people, because I thought that it was going to end up being a good thing for us, and you can argue whether it was or not. So I think I followed it really closely at first, but each new little bit of news that comes out, I feel more detached. And I think that that's a sentiment among a lot of college sports fans especially, is because it feels like this is dehumanizing and de-amateurizing this entire way of life that we have, I think, thought that we've been in, but really haven't been in for a really long time. And so I almost want this spoon-fed to me as if to say, are we going to be all right? Is this a step in the direction to kill college sports as we know it? Has that already happened? Is this a step in the right direction to getting players things that they deserve, especially in terms of their name, image, and likeness, which I feel like we strayed away from at the start when this whole thing began? So
yeah,
I want somebody to tell me, hey, you're still going to love watching A&M football. Well, you're still going to want to watch A&M football 5 years from now.
I'll address that part first because that's the most important part. And the answer is yes, because I do think for the person, for the type of fan, and I'm not saying this is you because I know this isn't you, but for the type of fan who just likes turning on the games on Saturdays or going to games on Saturdays, hanging out with their friends, seeing how the Aggies do this year, rooting them on, I think you can escape most of this and be okay.
How do I achieve this? How do I become this person, Travis?
I'm not going to say that because the answer is like, don't listen to this podcast.
Is it too late for me? Yes.
No, but the other point that you make is that this isn't what it used to be, and people are mad about that. I think people are kind of trying to point at whose fault is it that this isn't the way it used to be. It's easy to say the NCAA. And there's a lot of reasons why it's the NCAA. But if you want to go back, where this all started was in 1984 when the University of Oklahoma sued the NCAA for the rights to be able to broadcast their own games.
I'm down to blame OU. I am way down.
But so the NCAA controlled all the media rights for all the schools and said that only one college football game could be broadcast every week on Saturday. All the rest had to be you had to go to the game to see it. Well, the schools said, well, that's stupid. I can make a lot of money off of these games because you're making a lot of money off these games, and I want every one of my games to be broadcast. So they sued the NCAA, and Board of Regents versus the NCAA said that, in fact, the NCAA couldn't control all the broadcast rights. The schools own those. And then ultimately what you saw is that the conferences that they were aligned with, the reason why conferences have any teeth is because the schools waive their rights to the broadcast to the conferences, and then the conferences can go and then negotiate broadcast rights for all of the schools in the conference, and they get a cut of that. That's what made this the multi-billion-dollar industry that it is, instead of just, hey, let's see how many athletes that we can get in our school who are great to go play that school and see if our guys are better than their guys. Now, that's slightly reductionist because there was been recruiting and scholarships and money under the table since whenever. But ultimately, the court said in two more cases that, yes, this is a big business. This isn't just recreational sport or amateur sport, and athletes just deserve more and more of the compensation that comes from this. In the O'Bannon case, though, notably that did away with the first NCAA football franchise because they wanted money for being in that football game. The next one was the Alston case, which said we need more. If we get into an academic program that says we get a laptop because of this, before athletes couldn't get that laptop because it could have been an impermissible benefit from the school. So the Supreme Court said no, they should be able to get that laptop, and in their concurring opinion said, and bring us any other of these compensation-related issues with the NCAA, because we have a problem with them, and we want a chance to rule on that, and that's where we are. So the moment that this became big business is the moment that the amateur started, and that goes back really to kind of 1984 is a good starting point with that Oklahoma versus the Board of Regents meeting. But all that to be said, I do think if you just want to show up and watch the guys play football on Saturday, tune in, watch them, talk about it with your buddies, the guys on the roster, for the most part, I think that that's okay, and you're going to be okay. You're not going to need to know how much money they are under the cap, how many dollars they are under the cap, and how many scholarships that they're offering to players each year.
But does the student part of the student athlete still matter to fans? Because you can go and watch and not worry about being under the cap or not, but that ends up being a big issue with the NFL. Casual fans will still hear about contracts and this quarterback can't go to this team because he's got this big of a contract, and it just wouldn't fit the salary cap there. You have Shamar Stewart, who's not practicing right now because they can't come to an agreement with the Bengals on his rookie contract. So the money is such a big part of the NFL, which I think is what turns off a lot of college football fans from the NFL. Granted, I'm a fan of both, and there are lots of people that are fan of both, but I know lots of people that prefer college football because it doesn't involve that. It doesn't involve the professionalism of it, and they like. Granted, I don't know how much integrity to amateurism there ever was,
right?
But they still cling on to. I just want to see kids play hard and play for that team on their chest. And not worry about how much money they're making or all these other factors that you get with the NFL.
Yeah, there's a couple pieces to that. I think what you're seeing, so with this revenue share that's going to be coming in, athletes are going to be getting into contracts with the school. You know, we used to have the national letter of intent that players signed to say that they are officially signed with the school. Well, that went away about 2 years ago, I want to say, two recruiting cycles ago. In looking ahead towards the fact that the binding agreements that players are going to have with their schools in the future are going to be these rev share agreements. And some schools have played with the idea of putting in multi-year, the contracts are for multi-years, and if you want to get out of that contract, you have to buy out of it like a coach would if he wanted to leave the job. Yormark, the AD at Arkansas, notably and famously said that they're going to start enforcing these buyout clauses. And that's where you start to get a little bit of maybe the reduction in players leaving for the transfer portal, in that schools are saying, okay, if you're a big shot and you want to play at the school and you think you're worth this large sum of the revenue sharing that we can give you, that's great, but we need an assurance that you're going to be here for several years. And if you want to go somewhere else, that's fine, but you're going to have to pay your way out, or the school that you're going to go to has to pay your way out of that contract. And I think that's going to mitigate some of that movement. And once you mitigate some of the movement, and that takes away a little bit of the leverage that the players have, you don't necessarily maybe see the Nico situation from Tennessee where he kind of holds out of practice and enters the transfer portal, because ultimately they say, that's fine if you want to leave. We've already agreed to a contract. You just need to pay the money to buy out if you want to go somewhere else and test the market.
Is that something that could be universally kind of imposed or regulated, where the NCAA says that you have to have these kind of binding agreements if or is it going to be up to the schools? You know, because you could have one school that does revenue sharing but has no consequences for leaving, and then others like Arkansas that's going to, you know, put the hammer down and say, you got to buy out.
It depends on you. I think any type of enforcement that the NCAA tries to put on what a contract looks like might be able to be sued. Like might fall under legal scrutiny.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of how we got into this whole mess. So I don't think the NCAA can say, hey, everybody needs to have multi-year deals in their contracts and put these buyout clauses. But I think most universities are trying to find ways to get a little bit of the leverage back in some of these deals, so that, because right now, beforehand, the universities and the athletic departments and the NCAA had all of the leverage. Now, when NIL came into the fray and some of these other court injunctions came out that said you can use NIL to recruit players, you can transfer as many times as you want, these kinds of injunctions, it swung everything back to the players. So I think everything is trying to pull itself back a little bit towards the middle, and I think some of these clauses, I think you'll probably hear about more of these clauses from more schools than you wouldn't, because that's an effort to kind of pull the pendulum back to the middle a little bit.
That is an interesting thing that I hadn't really thought of, is maybe it does swing it back to like, hey, we're going to take care of you as long as you show a commitment to us, right? You're going to get what we have promised you as long as, this. It reminds me of that Walter Nolan tweet where he said, y'all make sure to read your contracts. Well, duh. Right? I would think.
Thanks.
But yeah, that is interesting, because I mean, to me, and I know a couple of my friends share this sentiment, is like the landscape of college football as is very messy, obviously, but I think so much of it could be fixed by getting rid of that you can transfer as many times as you want rule, or even shrinking the window to only just one time a year or something like that. But we know that's not really going to happen, because there's no real basis for why it should, other than I just want to go 1 year and feel like I know everybody on the team. It's not a good enough reason to bring that rule back, right? So as far as that is concerned, that sounds good to me. I will also say I am very worried about players and their psyche and their mental health and their emotional stability in this era, because of all of the decisions and fame and now money that is being thrust upon them. And not to say that hasn't been a problem for years and years and years, But now there's contracts involved and things like that, and so I think A&M has already done this, and I'm sure a lot of other big schools have. Like, the amount of resources that need to be devoted to educating these players is hopefully going to continue to come up too. And Tyler, you mentioned the point about we're losing amateurism and a lot of these guys aren't going to be student athletes. Well, I hope at the very least that these athletes are getting financial literacy training and how to read a contract and how to represent yourself, and at least like even if it boils down to like branding and how to brand yourself and how to stay above the muck and things like that. So I'm pretty concerned about that.
So in Texas's state NIL law, which is a whole nother issue, NIL wasn't rolled out as a national thing. Each individual state kind of had to roll out their own law before the NCAA got on and said, okay, well, if your state doesn't have a law, you can have NIL too. Texas has its own state NIL law. A new one was passed just a few weeks ago, was signed by the governor. But in that, it mandates that, at least in the state of Texas, if you go to a school in the state of Texas and you're going to engage in NIL, which is everybody, you have to go through some financial literacy courses. So that's actually mandated by state law. Now, the extent that what that looks like, we don't know, because it's what they do within the athletic department. But there is something like that.
Yeah, I mean, are they handing them a book and saying, "Here you go"?
Right. They do have seminars, and I do know that they've called certain professionals and experts in different fields regarding finance and NIL into these kind of multi-day seminars that they have to sit through or be a part of. But, there's going to be some athletes who take it really seriously, just like classes.
Right.
And then just college kids. There's some college kids who are going to take it seriously, and there's some college kids who are going to sleep through it or text through it or whatever.
And non-athletes probably did that too.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean... That's a valid. We all remember what we were like when we were 18 years old.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing that's worrisome to me, because you hear all the time of when guys get into the NFL and not, doing their rookie contract. They're not very smart with their first few years in the league, and a lot of these athletes run into millions of dollars for the first time, and they end up going bankrupt.
Yeah.
And, you hear those stories all the time, and that's at the professional level. When they're 4 or 5 years older, now you're talking about 17, 18-year-old kids.
Add in a Maserati and a private jet lease.
And frankly, and most of these, obviously are going to be the cream of the crop, so they'll end up going pro anyways. But you're talking about kids that are getting into these contracts that probably won't even end up once they graduate. They're done with sport.
Over 40 years ago, my parents started C&J Barbecue, and today we continue to honor Dad's legacy with the best barbecue in the Brazos Valley. With locations on Harvey Road, Southwest Parkway, and our newest location on William Joe Bryan, we carry on our family tradition of serving up award-winning barbecue, sides, and desserts. We also offer delivery, catering, as well as custom menus and private chef services. Come visit us today for some of the best barbecue around. C&J Barbecue. The C is for Chip, the J is for Joe, and the barbecue is for you.
So you raise a good point, and it's something else that I want to talk about. And I think we've seen, as NIL has taken shape, that some of these that ultimately through collectives, what started as, hey, let's give these athletes the ability if company XYZ down the street wants to have this player on to do a commercial with them, they should be able to go on and do that commercial and get money for it. Or if they want to go to this store and sign autographs for 3 hours and get paid a fee for doing that, they should be able to make the money for that. What that morphed into is the start of these collectives who pool in money, and then when a player wants to come, he says, this is what I want my NIL deal to be, and they say, okay, we're going to give you X amount of dollars this year, and we'll basically find some things for you to do. We'll stick you on a few podcasts, we'll have you come out and sign some autographs here, and we'll figure it out, but here's the money, not really in advance because it's in payments, but we'll tell you the value ahead. And part of this settlement was trying to rein that in a little bit, because that's pay for play. That is, you're a good player. We want you on our roster. We're going to give you this money to be on our roster, and then we'll find
figure out
ways.
The rest later.
We'll figure out the rest later, or we kind of have some built-in, interviews, things that you can do to say this is quid pro quo. Well, so part of this is, I mentioned it, they start this College Sports Commission, which has platforms by Deloitte and a company LBI. we mentioned it's going to monitor revenue sharing for all the programs, so make sure everybody's under the cap. But this is kind of the big deal. It assesses valid business purposes and the compensation of all NIL deals. So Max, if you're a starting guard on A&M's football team and C&J's Barbecue wants to pay you to do a commercial and they want to pay you $1,000 per commercial, that's over $600. You're going to have to report your NIL to this commission through a platform, say who is doing it, supply the contract, and there's going to be people who are hired as a part of this commission, this clearinghouse, who are going to review the contract and say, okay, so you're going to make $1,000 commercial to Pedal Barbecue in 8 commercials.
Which is an offensive lineman's dream, by the way.
Honestly, yes.
Sounds amazing.
And they are... and we've seen that there's other contracts for other people doing commercials for restaurants. That's about the market standard. Yeah, okay, good. Go do that. But if Tyler is also going to be an offensive lineman for A&M, and he submits an NIL thing that's for $100,000 to make one social media post about a restaurant, and that company is owned by A&M's biggest booster, they're going to look at that and say, okay, well, there's a relationship component here. He's one of the biggest boosters, and he's already giving money to the collective, or he runs the collective. So that's kind of a red flag. And then you're only making one post, and you're getting paid $100,000. That's not market value. No, go back and redo this contract. That's pay for play. You can't make that money. And then if either one of you say, well, that's not fair, you can go into arbitration with them, or if they find that like a team went up to the salary cap but has a bag man paying players revenue sharing under the table, they can issue violations similar to what the NCAA. So this is supposed to be the teeth that the NCAA lost, and it's supposed to rein in some of that. We're just going to give you a lump sum of money, and we'll find something that you can do for it.
So under these new regulations, does a Texas Tech softball player get over $1 million?
So interesting. Anything that was signed prior to the settlement approval will not have to go through the NCAA.
And she signed a new one right before this went through.
Because
had she signed it after what you just told me, I don't know if $1 million is the fair market.
We don't know exactly what that's for. So
right, that's going to be the hard thing too.
If she's doing an NIL post every day, who knows? There is no market value for these things right now. That's what this is going to establish. You make a good point, though, and this is what that conversation that Bucky McMillan was having in his introductory press conference. They thought this settlement was going to be approved right around basketball portal time, and so a lot of schools were going in and trying to sign these huge NIL contracts to get players to come in because that wouldn't fall under the jurisdiction of this clearinghouse. As soon as that settlement was signed, everything after now has to go in to this clearinghouse and get approved. But there will be athletes who are on NIL deals for the next maybe 1 to 2 years that were signed before the approval that will be making what would be necessarily deemed illegal now, but they already signed the deals, and those aren't going to get retroactively approved because they can't.
Right.
So that's a little bit of a sticking point in all of this, but yeah, that's kind of the thing that's getting the most attention right now, because Trev Alberts was actually a part of the group that kind of formed the framework of this commission, and he said at SEC spring meetings that this whole settlement, this all works so far as everyone decides that they want rules and they're going to abide by the rules. And as in his kind of direct quote was, we can't do this thing anymore where something happens and we don't like it and we run to our attorney general and say, fix this because this went against us and we're going to sue and we're going to cause upheaval. That being said, there's not any indication of the full legality of if this still is anti-competitive, because they still are in essence price fixing NIL, but what they're kind of saying is, yeah, but the prices got out of control and we kind of need to rein that down for some level of competitive competitive, the nature of this competition, and so that it actually serves the purpose that it was created to. It's the purpose and the spirit. Let's get into this real quick too. This is the last little graphic I have. This is what we know so far about how Texas A&M is going to comply with the settlement. Trev Albert said at spring meetings they're going to share revenue with 6 sports. We don't know what those sports are, but you can. If we were sitting here going to have to guess, it's going to be football, baseball, men's basketball, women's basketball, and then out of
I would guess softball if you're doing baseball.
Softball, soccer, volleyball, men's and women's tennis, men's and women's golf. There's 2
track.
There's 2 spots remaining if you're going to share with 6 sports. Those are still yet to be released. They're going to fully fund all of their roster spots, which is going to be approximately 410 scholarships. That's up from about 255 last year. Last year they had about 255 total scholarships, so a lot more money there. But that's all we know. We don't know what the revenue sharing formula is. A lot of schools have said it's going to be like 75 football, 15 men's basketball, 5 women's basketball, 5 all the rest of the sports. Trev Albert said he didn't necessarily think it's going to be quite like that, but they want to find the sports and the venues that they know that they can continue to make and raise revenue, which when you talk about revenue, it's ticket sales, it's places that have suites and premium seating environments that you can continue to make revenue on, things like that. So that's kind of what it looks like for A&M.
So the only parameters with this house settlement is that a university has that cap of $20.5 million. But it's up to the school of how they distribute said $20.5 million. So the thing with this, let's say track and field, and we don't know yet, but if they are not a revenue sharing sport, then you have Arkansas that says, you know what, we are going to revenue share with track and field.
Yeah.
There's a big talk about Big East basketball schools that don't have football. So their 75% can go to basketball.
Right. You go all in on basketball. What if Boise State just decides, you know what, we're just going to share everything with, and this would be great for a Boise State type school, or let's say Alabama says, we're going all in on football. That's the thing to me that's going to be weird. Or Georgia says, A&M has one of the best women's tennis programs right now. I doubt that's going to be a revenue sharing sport. What if there's another team out there that says, you know what, we'll revenue share with tennis, and that brings like some of those best athletes
Mississippi
out.
State with baseball.
Yeah.
And you just start building basically kind of these pockets of super teams.
Mississippi State, that's a good call in the SEC, or Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt, for some reason, if they wanted to, could decide, okay, let's just use that 75% football model as a baseline, even though we don't know that's what A&M is going to do. Maybe Vanderbilt shares 60% with football. They, instead of doing men's basketball at 15%, they do baseball at 15%, but then maybe bump it up to maybe do 20% for baseball.
Yeah.
And then trickle it down because that's what they want to do.
I think in a way you've already kind of started to see this. And when it became most apparent was when Arkansas chose to retain Sam Pittman and go out and try to get Coach Cal. I think you saw a clear
the white flag right now. I mean, obviously you want to be competitive,
exactly. And they're still getting guys out of the portal, and it looks like they will field a perfectly capable team. And we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in a couple months. We'll go to Fayetteville, and that's not going to be an easy team to beat, et cetera, and so forth. But it was a clear thing that Juracek did there that said, right now, football is not the priority. And you can argue about whether or not that worked out for them because Pittman had an okay year. But I think they came to the conclusion of, you know what, we're going to put all our money right now in basketball to try to get this dude. And in hindsight, it feels like that kind of worked out for them because in football, they ended up about as mediocre as maybe you'd expect an Arkansas first-year head coach to be, and they didn't have to pay that buyout. And here we are. And I think Trev is maybe doing a little bit of that Moneyball aspect too, that maybe 2 or 3 years from now we're going to say, hey, you know what? It was probably good that we didn't fire early after 1 year. It was probably good that we went and got the cheaper up-and-comer Bucky McMillan. Hopefully we're saying these things. But
I think you're onto something there. I think football is probably, especially the SEC, is going to always kind of reigns supreme. I think where you're at a good point with Pittman and Coach Cal is that you're not going to fire a coach and pay a buyout the same time that you're going to go out and pay a buyout for another coach.
Right.
And you're not going to double up like that anymore.
Yeah.
One is going to take a little bit more of a priority season to season. I think what you will start seeing is, you kind of mentioned there at the end, the sports that are below, the football and whatever that school's 1B sport is, whether it's men's basketball or baseball or something like that. If you retain, if it gets to the point where the fan base is like, we're done with this coach, but they retain him. And they say, okay, well, we're going to let them play out the rest of their contract and just not re-up the contract as to not have to pay a buyout, and then go bring in an up-and-comer. Like, that's when you can really kind of start to see, okay, well, we've decided that we're going to just kind of maintain the status quo with this program because we want this other program over here to excel. I think you will start seeing that.
But to Max's point, you maybe not seeing that in plain sight, but I think that's kind of the trajectory that Trev Alberts is headed with some. I mean, he hasn't gone and made that aggressive, splashy hire yet. He's kind of waiting things out. And this isn't, you brought up Michael Early, but it's not just Michael Early. There are several coaches out there that he's retained that people are kind of scratching their heads about right now. And I think it's because of Trev's forward thinking with things like this and his business mindset and following the money. I think you're for sure going to see this.
And here's the thing about this too. No one knows what is going to get approved, if it was going to get approved, what this is going to look like, how people are going to find ways to circumvent this. So everybody's just kind of guessing. They're having plans, and they have plans that they think are going to work, but we're going to still have to see 2 or 3 years out whose preparation worked the best.
Yeah, and that's why at this point I'm Team Trev until something glaringly, obviously wrong has happened, right? And I don't think we're going to really see that ever, because I think he's a very brilliant mind, and I don't know. There's just plenty of people out there who want to fire said person and go out and spend as much money because A&M should have this kind of money, and you can argue about whether or not we do, but there's still a precedent that has to be set, and you have to spend your money correctly and wisely, regardless of how much money you actually have. And so I think the more and more we're going to see that, Trev holding off on certain fires or buyouts or whatever are going to prove that, hey, we need to keep track of all these dollars and cents, right? And just flippantly firing somebody before we know fully what this landscape's going to look like is probably not a great idea.
And I think with A&M and with pretty much most SEC teams is they are going to invest heavily into football. I think that's clear from the start. Texas A&M, their number one priority is football. So I think they're not going to hold back on investing and paying for a competitive football team. And how everything else kind of falls into the cracks after that, we'll wait to see.
Yeah. So where this goes next is there is still plenty. The Judge Claudia Wilkins said in her 76-page brief that there is several pieces of this that still could get litigated outside the settlement. They can't. Anybody who opted into the settlement can't sue for NIL related compensation, because that's what this solved. But there's pieces of the settlement that they can sue about that piece of the settlement. And the biggest one, the first one that has fallen, is Title IX. If this settlement is bound by Title IX, which would mean then if you look at revenue sharing, that 75-15 5-5 model wouldn't work, because it would need to be 50-50 men's sports, women's sports. And we'll see what the courts have to say about that.
I tell you what, man.
You're a really good volleyball team.
That's exactly what I was about to say. Like, if you want to get eyeballs on games like that, like, and you talk about the women's sports that already have a pretty good following, you're talking volleyball, softball, and women's basketball. Man, if you start giving them good compensation, that immediately gives every athletic department in the country a reason to start investing. Well, not a reason to invest because they have to, but a reason to start investing in the fan experience and finding ways to get it on TV and things like that. And then all of a sudden, people are watching women's sports.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, it's a chicken or the egg kind of thing because
Yeah.
you want to say, well, Title IX, if this is bound by it, that means that you need to be equal to women's sports, and what that would do for women's sports
Bring it.
would be huge.
Yeah.
But you also are saying that what this is sharing revenue, and so what mostly these people who are putting together these equations are saying is that, well, football makes up in some places 100% of the revenue that schools have. So by taking 15% of that 100% and giving it to other sports is actually generous enough, because we're talking sharing revenue, and this is what the revenue looks like. Most sports don't make money other than football. And so there's both sides to that to say, the equity would be awesome for women's sports to see what that would do. And if you give them the equity, they can maybe change some of those revenue numbers, because then maybe women's volleyball games become more valuable to broadcast partners. But that's not what the numbers say now.
Sure, but if that's the way that it played out overnight, I seriously think you would see that change. Where there's the Nebraska volleyballs of the world and stuff like that, I think you'd see at least a couple per conference all of a sudden become that.
It wouldn't just
basketball.
be South Carolina women's basketball.
Right.
There'd be a plethora of teams with that same experience. So it wouldn't just be Nebraska volleyball. You'd see other schools following suit. And I think it's exciting to think about the potential of what that could do.
We got just a few quick minutes left. What did we not cover? What questions do y'all still have that the listeners might still have before we get out of here? I know you have a headache.
No, I just want to know.
At least the AC kicked on.
Yeah, it does feel so much better in here. I just want to know if Aggie football is going to do well next year. Honestly,
some answers we don't have.
Right. I do think this was a very valuable conversation in things. But that's kind of what I'm thinking of. I love this time of year because, and I think we mentioned this last week, everybody's undefeated right now, and this does add a whole other element to the talking season that is. But yeah, I feel like we covered a lot of good things here today.
Tyler, anything?
I think we hit all the main points. I mean, this is one of those things that, as things unfold, obviously discussions and talking points are going to continue to kind of present themselves. But as far as now as hitting the basics, I think
I will add, and this is honestly, to be completely transparent, this is an opinion that I've kind of formed over the course of this afternoon, where I think the die-hard college football fan who always loved college football, college sports in general, because of the amateurism aspect of it and things like that. Well, first of all, the easiest thing to say to that is that's probably been dead for a while, with a lot of the way that things have gone over the past couple decades, I think you could even argue. But I think you're always still going to have, if there's that A&M on the chest, I think you're always still going to have the players who really don't care that much about that name on the chest. But I think the vast majority of those players on the team know that football is not forever, and that they are going to have to get an education, and I think there's still going to be that pageantry. That sort of thing just doesn't go away.
Mike Elko has talked about this a lot over the offseason. The amount of players that are involved in these discussions about how much they're going to make and revenue share each year and have multi-year those are so few on a team. Even a football team, they're few. The majority of the players are going to get a number. They're going to probably look at the number and go, hey, I wanted to come to A&M anyway. That's icing on the cake. That's great. And it's going to be the normal college experience for them, except they get a paycheck every couple $100 every month,
right?
To go
instead of that money in their helmet or underneath their cleat tongue.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that will be money they can go to, Pluckers or buy something on Amazon or C&J. Yeah, and some running around money.
Yeah.
That they couldn't make otherwise. That's going to be the vast majority of most of these teams. The players that drive the headlines on some of this stuff, that's maybe a handful on a football team. So you're right. You make a good point there about it's probably going to be mostly the same.
Yeah. Let's go get a 2-meat plate. What do you say?
Yeah, it sounds kind
Let's
of
do
good to me. Tyler, real quick before we get out of here, track athletes.
Oh, yeah.
That's coming up. What do you got on track?
So there are, if I had caught me off guard. But there are 25 entries, which is one of they have Texas A&M, both men's and women's, have a very real shot of getting to the podium and bringing home a national title because they have so many athletes there. Not every team has 12 entries from both men's and women's there. So because of that, just sheer numbers, they've got a chance of bringing home a national title. There's a lot of big names out there. Ahmad Robinson is one to look at, who's in the 400, the 4x4, and the 4x1. He's not a 100 runner, but A&M kind of put together a ragtag group of a hurdler, a 400 runner, guys that aren't 100 sprinters, and they did good enough to advance to the nationals for the 4x1 team. They actually run their prelim is tonight at 6. So that'll kind of kick things off. Ahmad Robinson, Sam Whitmarsh is going to try and get the title in the 800. A&M's got a great, I'm going to butcher her name, so I won't say it, but they've got a freshman that's a heptathlete. She's really good and will contend for a national title. They've got the men have a pole vaulter that will, if everything goes right, he should be a national champion. They've got a hurdler who's going to try and repeat being a indoor champ. She won the national championship. Jaya Covington won the national championship in the 60-meter hurdles. Now she's doing the 100-meter hurdles outdoor. She'll try to get a couple of goals.
And do we have Ernest Campbell in his last
Ernest Campbell in his last. I'm not expecting, if I'm being real, like he is there, and I think he will. He's one of the best in the country. I'm not expecting a podium finish from him.
Gotcha.
Just from the seed times, but you never know. He's there. You got to run the race.
Absolutely.
So this is Ernest Campbell's kind of last hurrah with Maroon on.
Gotcha.
So that'll be fun to look for. But yeah, lots of action going on these next few days.
Well, I got to get these two out of here because they got shows to run today.
We got to get to work.
As we've said here most of the time, we had our dose of our helping of broccoli today. We can have our football dessert maybe next week.
Sounds good.
On all that. So thanks so much if you stuck through all of this, thanks so much for sticking through all of it. Be sure to check these guys on the newscats and KBTX.com for all of our continuing coverage of the House settlement and how that affects A&M and getting us through the summertime to that fall football season. So for Tyler Shaw and Max Crawford, I'm Travis Brown. This is the Aggie Game Day Extra Podcast. We'll see you next week.